No one in the small mountain town of Pine Hollow, Wyoming, believed a 15-year-old boy could survive the winter alone after his grandmother passed. Noah Parker stood beside her grave with his hands buried deep in the pockets of his thin jacket, willing his body not to tremble. The wind sliced through the cemetery like a sharpened blade, carrying the sharp scent of pine and fresh snow. Behind him, voices murmured in low tones about how he was too young, too slight, too quiet to make it on his own. Some claimed he'd be shipped off before the first real blizzard hit. Others said he wouldn't even last that long. Noah didn't respond. He kept his gaze fixed on the simple wooden marker, carved with his grandmother's name, Evelyn Parker. She had been his whole world since he was 7. Ever since his parents were taken in a highway accident that left nothing but flashing lights and unanswered questions. She had taught him how to split logs clean down the grain, how to hear a storm long before it arrived, how to read the clouds like a story written across the sky. But more than any of that, she taught him that winter wasn't something to fear. It wasn't cruel. It was simply powerful, and power, she said, could be respected. 3 days after they laid her to rest, Noah discovered the metal box she had hidden beneath a loose plank in the cabin floor. The hinges creaked when he opened it, releasing the faint smell of old paper and earth. Inside rested a worn notebook, its pages filled with careful sketches, measurements, and notes written in faded ink. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. On the first page, in darker letters, were the words, "If the ground stays warm, so will you." He turned the pages slowly. The drawings revealed a shelter carved into the hillside behind the cabin-thick earthen walls, a low roof to trap heat, and a small window angled south to catch every drop of winter sunlight. It looked nothing like the tall timber cabins scattered across Pine Hollow. It was smaller, smarter. Hidden. That same afternoon, Noah took a shovel from the shed and walked to the slope behind the house. The ground was already stiff with cold, but not yet frozen solid. When neighbors noticed him digging into the hillside, laughter drifted across the road. Kids digging his own grave. One man joked at the gas station, "Snow's gonna bury him alive." Another muttered. Even Mr. Dalton, the oldest builder in town, slowed his truck as he passed and leaned out the window. "You can't live underground, son. That's for animals and the dead." Noah kept digging. Blisters bloomed across his palms. His shoulders ached with a steady burn that followed him into sleep. Cold soil slipped down his sleeves and settled at his collar, clinging to his skin. But every night, beneath the soft glow of a lantern, he sat at the kitchen table and studied his grandmother's notebook. He traced the lines of her drawings with careful fingers, memorizing each measurement. Sometimes, in the quiet, he could almost hear her voice calm and certain. "You don't fight the cold," she used to say. "You work with it." Still, when darkness fell thick around the cabin, doubt crept closer. Noah would lie awake in the narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the wooden boards. The emptiness inside the house felt heavier than the freezing air outside. There were moments when he wondered if the town was right, if he was just a frightened boy pretending to be braver than he felt. But every morning, he picked up the shovel again. By the end of the week, the pit had grown so deep Noah needed a rope to climb back out. The earth around him smelled rich and steady, like something that had been storing warmth for generations. The walls held firm beneath his hands. The deeper he dug, the quieter it became, as though the hill itself was sheltering him. One afternoon, Mrs. Turner, a widow who lived down the road, arrived with a thermos of soup. She stood nearby, watching him work, her gloved hands folded. "You really think this will save you?" she asked softly. Noah paused, wiping sweat and dirt from his forehead with his sleeve. He nodded once. "My grandma did," he answered. And that was enough. He wasn't digging to prove anyone wrong. He was digging to keep a promise. By the time the first frost settled over Pine Hollow, the hole had begun to resemble something close to a room. The walls stood straight and packed firm. The floor was tamped down hard beneath his boots. A narrow trench curved uphill, designed to guide melting snow away from the entrance exactly as the notebook instructed. From sunrise to sunset, Noah worked. His movements were steady, deliberate. Dirt streaked his face and sweat dampened his collar. Before freezing in the late afternoon air, his hands grew rougher, stronger. That was when people began to watch more closely. Mr. Dalton returned first. He climbed down into the excavation, crouched low, and rapped his knuckles against the dirt walls. He shook his head slowly. "This ground's going to give once it freezes and thaws," he warned. "You're building yourself a trap." Noah didn't argue. He continued placing stones along the back wall, locking them together the way his grandmother's sketches showed, tight and careful, each piece supporting the next. A few days later, Pastor Green appeared, his long coat brushing the frost-covered grass, polished boots shining despite the mud. He stood at the edge of the pit and peered down as if Noah were already beneath the earth. "People are meant to live in the light," he said, voice echoing slightly in the hollow. "Not underground like burrowing animals. This doesn't feel right." Noah looked up at him, calm but firm. "My grandma went to your church every Sunday," he said quietly, "and she built 5 of these." Pastor Green had no reply to that. The harshest words came from Travis Reed, the rancher's son. Loud and restless, always eager for an audience, he pulled up near the cabin with 2 friends, tires crunching over frost. Leaning out the truck window, he called down into the pit, "Hey, tunnel boy, you planning to hide from winter or let it bury you?" Laughter followed. Travis waved a bill in the air. $10 says you don't make it to Christmas." Noah felt heat rise to his cheeks, a sharp contrast to the cold air. He didn't speak. He waited until their truck disappeared down the road before his hands began to tremble. At night, the uncertainty slipped back in like wind through cracked boards. The cabin felt enormous and hollow without his grandmother's presence. The wind threaded through the trees, low and mournful, like something alive and restless beyond the walls. Some nights, Noah sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook open, staring at the drawings until Thellenton flickered low. What if they're right? What if this really is a grave? One evening, as he carried stones from the creek, his arms finally gave out. He dripped them and sat on the ground, breathing hard. The hill loomed above him, dark and silent. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered to no one. That was when Mrs. Turner appeared again, bundled in a thick coat, holding a jar. "Thought you might need something warm," she said, handing him stew. She looked into the hole, then back at him. "You remind me of my husband." Stubborn as a fence post when he believed in something. Noah managed a weak smile. Headed in the blizzard of 2008, she had dead softly. "Built his house the same way everyone else did." She didn't laugh off hole. She didn't call it a grave. The next morning, Noah woke up sore but steady. He dug deeper. He laid logs across the top for a ceiling frame, cut a small opening where the sun would hit in winter. People drove by and slowed to stare. Some shook their heads, some muttered, some waited for him to fail. But the shape of the shelter grew clearer each day, and inside Noah something changed. He was still scared, still lonely, still just 15. Blythe wasn't digging because he was desperate anymore. He was digging because he believed, and belief, once it took root, was harder than frozen ground. By mid-November, Noah's shelter had a shape and a name in his mind. He called it the Warm Place. The back wall was solid earth. The sides were lined with stone he'd hauled from the creek. Our wooden frame stretched across the top, waiting for logs and packed soil. It wasn't finished, but it was far enough along that Noah could feel it working with him, instead of against him. Then came the accident. One gray afternoon, Noah hitched a small sled to his dog, Buddy, and headed into the trees for more firewood. Snow from Annalee storm covered the ground in a thin, slick layer. He was tired, his ribs had from weeks of lifting stone sand, dragging logs. He didn't see the ice beneath the snow. The ground vanished under his boots, and Noah went down hard. Sliding into a shallow ravine hidden by drifted snow, his chest slammed into a rock. The air rushed out of him in a sharp burning gasp. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sky above him looked flat and colorless, like cold steel. This is it, he thought. They were right. but he didn't fall. The dog stood at the edge of the ravine and barked once, then again. Then, without stopping, hours later, Mrs. Turner heard it from her perch. She followed the sound through trees and found Noah half buried in snow. Barely conscious, she wrapped him in her coat, dragged him onto the sled, and got him home just before dark. 2 cracked ribs, the doctor said. No work for weeks. Noah lay in the cabin, staring at the ceiling while winter crept closer. The shelter behind the house waited, unfinished. His hands felt restless. His chest hurt every time heccuffed. That was when the letter arrived. It was stamped with the county seal and signed by a lawyer named Wallace Grant. The words were neat and cold. Due to your age and inability to maintain the property, the land is subject to transfer of guardianship. Noah didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. Someone was trying to take his home. Mr. Grant showed up 2 days later in a clean coat and polished boots, standing in the doorway like he owned it. You're a minor, he said smoothly. This land isn't safe for you. I can arrange a sale and find you a proper place in town. This is my home, Noah said. Mr. Grant smiled thinly. Not legally. That night, Noah felt smaller than he had since his grandmother died. But the next morning, another truck pulled into the yard. Samuel Brooks, a cattle rancher with a weather-beaten face, in a quiet voice, stepped out. He had known Noah's grandmother years ago. She had once helped him survive a winter storm by teaching him how to pack snow insulation for his barn. She saved me herd, Samuel said. So, I'm not letting Gunyoni steal what she left you. He went with Noah to the county office. He spoke for him when Noah's voice shook. He offered to serve as Noah's legal guardian until he turned 18. The court agreed. Mr. Grant left without another word. That evening, Noah sat on the edge of his half-built shelter. Buddy beside him, the sky turning pink with cold sunset. He still hurt. He still wasn't finished. Winter was still coming. But no, he knew something important. He wasn't alone anymore, and the warm place would be ready in time. By the first week of January, the warm place was finished. It wasn't pretty. The walls were rough stone and packed dirt. The ceiling was low enough that Noah had towed out near the back. 2 small windows faced south, catching what little winter sunlight there was. Above the shelter sat a simple shed where Samuel Brooks kept a few goats and a cow. Close north at their body heat drifted down through the thick wooden floor. On most days, it stayed around 60 inside. Outside, the world was turning. White and mean. The storm arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky went from pale blue to steel gray in less than an hour. Wind slammed into the hills like a freight train. Snow didn't fall. It flew ways. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped below 20 below zero. Noah sat inside the warm place with Buddy curled at his feet, listening to the wind howl through the trees. He fed the stove small pieces of wood, careful not to waste any. The walls held steady. The air stayed warm. Then, near midnight, someone pounded on the door. Noah froze. The knocking came again, desperate, uneven. He pulled on his coat and opened it. Just enough to see shapes in the blowing snow, Mrs. Turner stood first, her face pale with fear. Behind her was Pastor Green, his beard stiff with eyes dot and leaning against the door frame. Barely standing was Travis Reed, the same boy who had laughed at Noah. Who would bet he'd be dead by Christmas? Our roofs are failing, Mrs. Turner said. The wind tore boards loose, the stove cracked. We can't keep warm. Travis' lips were blue. His hands shook so bad like couldn't speak. Noah didn't hesitate. Come in, he said. All of you? They crowded into the small space, stamping snow from their boots. The warmth hit him like a wall. Mrs. Turner let out a sob. Pastor Green dropped to his knees with realizing it. It's warm, Hugh whispered. Travis slid down the wall and covered his face with his hands. I was wrong, he said harassingly. I thought you were crazy. I thought you'd die other. Noah wrapped a blanket around him, sit near the stone. He said, Don't fall asleep. Yet, more people came as the night deepened, a family from the Eastridge. an older couple whose chimney had collapsed. By dawn, 8 people were packed inside the warm place with 1 dog and a low-burning fire. No ration food, heated water, made thin soup. The shelter held the heat like it had been built to do exactly this. The storm lasted for days. They listened to it hear at the world above them. They hardwood crack. They felt the ground tremble when the wind slammed into the hillside. No one went outside. On the 3rd night, Travis finally spoke again. "My dad told me you were digging your own grave." He said quietly. I believed him. No ostered at the stove. "My grandma said graves are for people who stop trying," he answered. "This place is for people who don't." Travis nodded, tears shining in his eyes. When the wind finally died, the silence felt unreal. They dug their way out through snow piled higher than windows. The old cabins across the valley were crushed or buried. Trees lay snapped like matchsticks. But the warm place stood untouched. It was the only light in a broken landscape, and the boy everyone had doubted had become there as they were alive. When the road finally reopened, the truth spread fast. 3 people in Pine Hollow had frozen in their cabins. 2 more had been found in collapsed sheds along the ridge. The storm had taken roofs, livestock, and old barns. But it hadn't taken the people who sheltered inside Noah's warm place. They all came back to see it in daylight. Mr. Dalton walked slowly around the hillside, touching the packed earth walls like he was reading Braille. "I built houses my whole life," he said quietly. "Never saw one that fought winter like this." Pastor Green stood beside him, his voice low. "I told you people weren't meant to live underground," he said to Noah. "I was wrong. You didn't hide from the storm. You outsmarted it." Even Travis Reed showed up again, this time without a joke on his lips. He helped shovel snow from the entrance and carry firewood inside. "I thought being tough meant lowering at what I didn't understand," he admitted. Turns out it meant listening. Noah didn't feel proud. He felt tired and grateful and strange inside, like a storm had taken something heavy away with it. A week later, Samuel Brooks brought builders from 2 nearby towns. They came with notebooks and measuring tapes, asking questions about angles, dirt thickness, and airflow. Noah showed them his grandmother's sketches and explained the parts he understood. "The ground keeps a steady temperature," he said. "You don't start at -20, you start closer to warm." They wrote it all down. By spring, 3 new hillside shelters were being built in Pine Hollow. Mrs. Turner's son said he wanted to be an engineer. Mr. Doane rebuilt his house half underground. Pastor Green preached about humility instead of fear. And Noah stayed where he was. He planted potatoes on the slope above the warm place. He fixed the windows. He kept the stove clean. Every night he still opened his grandmother's notebook and traced faded lines with his finger. He never said he was right. He only said, "She taught me this." Years later, people would call it the first winter-proof home in the valley. But to Noah, it was just a promise kept. A promise that said, don't fight nature. Learn from it. Don't mock what you don't understand. Study it. And don't wait to be strong before you do something brave. Because sometimes the one everyone else becomes the one everyone needs. So, here's the question for you. If you were in Noah's place, would you have listened to the town or trusted what your grandmother taught you? And how many good ideas in our own lives do widen it just because they look different from the crowd? If this story moved you, if it made you think about the wisdom passed down in your own family, take a second to share it with someone who needs that reminder. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true-style stories about courage, survival, and the quiet strength of ordinary people who chose not to give up. Because the summertime's the warmest place in the world isn't a house, it's a belief that refuses to freeze.